Gilles Deleuze begins his philosophy by quietly challenging one of the most basic assumptions people carry about the world. Most of us believe that things have fixed identities. We think of objects, people, and even ideas as stable and clearly defined. A person is a certain kind of person, an object is a specific object, and reality itself feels like something solid that can be understood by breaking it into categories. But Deleuze invites us to look again more carefully and to notice something different. Beneath the surface of stability, everything is constantly changing. Nothing is truly fixed. What appears stable is often just a temporary pattern within a deeper flow of movement. Instead of seeing the world as made up of fixed things, he encourages us to see it as made up of processes. Everything is in the process of becoming something else. A person is not a fixed identity, but a continuous development shaped by experiences, relationships, and changes over time. Even objects are not completely static. They are part of systems of movement, interaction, and transformation. This idea changes how we understand reality. Instead of focusing on what things are, the focus shifts to what things are becoming. Identity becomes less important than transformation. Stability becomes something temporary rather than permanent. To understand this more clearly, imagine how a river flows. At any moment, you can point to the river and say it is there. But the water is constantly moving. The river is never the same from one moment to the next. What appears to be a stable object is actually a continuous process. In the same way, human life is not fixed. A person is not defined once and for all. They are shaped by time, by experiences, by interactions, and by changes that never completely stop. This means that identity is not something you simply have. It is something that is constantly being formed. From this perspective, traditional ways of thinking can become limiting. When people try to define everything in clear categories, they may miss the movement and complexity that actually exist. For example, dividing the world into strict opposites such as good and bad, true and false, or right and wrong can oversimplify reality. Deleuze does not deny that differences exist, but he sees them in a different way. Instead of thinking in terms of rigid opposites, he focuses on variation and difference as something creative. Difference is not just a separation between things. It is a source of change and new possibilities. This idea leads to a new way of thinking about creativity. Creativity is not simply about producing something new out of nothing. It comes from combining, transforming, and reworking what already exists. New ideas emerge when different elements interact in unexpected ways. For example, in art, music, or thought, originality often comes from mixing influences, breaking patterns, and allowing new forms to appear. Creativity is not controlled entirely by strict rules. It involves movement, experimentation, and openness to change. This connects to another important idea, which is the rejection of rigid systems that try to control or limit how people think and live. Many structures in society encourage people to follow fixed paths. They define what is normal, what is acceptable, and what should be avoided. While these structures can create order, they can also restrict growth and creativity. When people are forced into fixed roles or identities, they may lose the ability to explore new possibilities. Their potential becomes limited by expectations. Deleuze encourages a different approach. Instead of fitting into predefined categories, individuals can explore multiple ways of being. A person is not limited to a single identity. They can change, adapt, and develop in different directions. This idea introduces the concept of multiplicity. Instead of being one fixed thing, reality is made up of many overlapping possibilities. A person can be many things at once, shaped by different influences and experiences. There is no single path that defines who they must become. This way of thinking creates a sense of openness. Life is not a straight line with a fixed destination. It is more like a network of paths, where different directions are always possible. Choices do not lead to a single final outcome, but to further possibilities. Another important aspect of this philosophy is the idea of connection. Nothing exists completely on its own. Everything is connected to something else. People are shaped by their relationships, their environment, and the systems they are part of. These connections form networks that influence how things develop. A change in one part of the system can affect many other parts. Because of this, understanding something requires looking at how it connects to other things rather than isolating it. This approach moves away from thinking in terms of isolated units and toward thinking in terms of relationships and interactions. Meaning does not come from individual elements alone, but from how they relate to each other. Through these ideas, the foundation of his philosophy begins to take shape. Reality is not made up of fixed identities, but of continuous processes. Difference is not a problem to be eliminated, but a source of creativity. Life is not a single path, but a field of multiple possibilities. This perspective invites a different way of experiencing the world. Instead of trying to control or define everything, it encourages openness to change, attention to connections, and an appreciation for the complexity of becoming. As this way of thinking deepens, attention begins to move towards something that shapes human life in a powerful but often hidden way. It is the force of desire. Most people think of desire as something simple, a personal feeling directed toward things they want. It is often understood as a lack, as if desire appears because something is missing and needs to be filled. But this philosophy turns that idea upside down. Desire is not a sign of something missing. It is a force that produces, connects, and creates. It is active rather than empty. Instead of thinking that people desire because they lack something, it becomes possible to see desire as something that builds relationships, ideas, and even entire systems of life. To understand this more clearly, imagine how people form connections. A person does not exist in isolation and then simply add relationships on top. Their desires already connect them to others, to places, to activities, and to ways of thinking. These connections are not secondary. They are part of how life is formed. Desire moves between people, between ideas, and between systems. It creates patterns of behavior, structures of society, and even forms of culture. It is not something that belongs only to individuals. It flows through networks, shaping how things develop and interact. This changes how human behavior is understood. Instead of seeing actions as isolated choices made by independent individuals, behavior becomes part of a larger system of connections. What a person wants, thinks, and does is influenced by many forces at once. Social structures, cultural expectations, and personal experiences all interact through desire. Because of this, desire can both create and restrict. On one hand, it opens possibilities. It allows people to explore, connect, and produce new forms of life. On the other hand, it can be shaped and directed by systems that limit those possibilities. Society plays a major role in shaping desire. From a very early age, people are taught what to want, what to value, and what to avoid. These lessons do not always feel forced. They often appear natural, as if they simply reflect how things are. But in reality, they are part of a larger structure that guides behavior. For example, ideas about success, normal life, or acceptable behavior are not neutral. They are produced within social systems that encourage certain patterns and discourage others. Over time, individuals may begin to desire what society expects them to desire, without questioning where those desires come from. This creates a subtle form of control. It is not always direct or visible. People may feel free while their choices are already shaped by forces they do not fully recognize. Desire becomes organized in a way that supports existing structures rather than challenging them. This is where the philosophy becomes more critical. It begins to question how systems of power operate not only through rules and authority, but through the shaping of desire itself. Instead of controlling people only through laws or force, systems can influence what people want, how they think, and how they see the world. Yet this does not mean that individuals are completely trapped. Because desire is active and creative, it also has the ability to break away from fixed patterns. It can form new connections, create new ways of thinking, and open paths that were not previously visible. This possibility leads to a different understanding of freedom. Freedom is not simply the absence of external control. It is the ability to form new connections, to explore new possibilities, and to move beyond the patterns that have been imposed. This movement can be understood as a kind of flow. Desire flows through different paths, sometimes following established routes, sometimes breaking away and creating new ones. When it follows rigid structures, life becomes predictable and limited. When it flows freely, new possibilities begin to appear. To describe this, Deleuze often uses the idea of systems that are either structured or open. Structured systems organize behavior in fixed ways. They create clear roles, expectations, and limits. Open systems allow movement, change, and variation. Neither type of system exists completely on its own. Life always involves a mixture of both. Some structure is necessary for stability, but too much structure can become restrictive. At the same time, complete openness without any form can lead to confusion or instability. The challenge is to find ways of living that allow movement without losing coherence. This means being able to navigate systems without being completely controlled by them. It involves recognizing patterns without becoming trapped within them. Another important idea emerges here, which is the rejection of fixed hierarchies in thinking. Traditional ways of understanding the world often place things in ordered levels. Some ideas are considered higher, more important, or more true than others. This creates a vertical structure where everything is ranked. Deleuze proposes a different way of thinking that is more horizontal. Instead of ranking ideas in a strict order, this approach focuses on connections between them. Ideas can link, combine, and interact without being placed in a rigid hierarchy. This can be compared to a network where different points are connected in many directions rather than arranged in a single line. In such a system, there is no single center that controls everything. Instead, meaning emerges from the relationships between different elements. This way of thinking encourages flexibility. It allows for multiple perspectives rather than a single fixed viewpoint. It opens space for creativity and variation, as ideas are free to connect in new and unexpected ways. At the same time, this perspective changes how identity is understood even further. A person is not a fixed self that remains the same over time. They are a collection of connections, experiences, and influences that are constantly changing. Identity becomes something fluid rather than stable. It is shaped by relationships, by movement, and by the continuous process of becoming. This does not mean that a person has no identity, but that their identity is not limited to a single definition. This fluidity can feel uncomfortable because it removes the certainty of fixed categories. Many people find security in clear definitions of who they are and where they belong. But these definitions can also limit growth by restricting the range of possibilities. By moving beyond rigid identities, individuals can explore different ways of being. They can change, adapt, and respond to new situations without being confined by a single label. This creates a more dynamic and open form of life. Another important theme in this philosophy is the idea that thought itself should remain active and flexible, instead of trying to reach final conclusions or absolute truths. Thinking becomes a process of exploration. It moves, shifts, and develops over time. This does not mean that truth disappears, but that it is understood differently. Truth is not a fixed point that can be fully captured. It emerges through processes, through interactions, and through the way ideas develop in relation to one another. Through all of these ideas, a deeper picture begins to form. Desire is not a simple feeling, but a force that shapes life. Systems of society influence desire, but desire also has the power to move beyond those systems. Identity is not fixed, but fluid, and thinking itself becomes a process rather than a final answer. Life, in this sense, becomes something dynamic and constantly changing. It is not a stable structure to be defined once and for all, but an ongoing movement of connections, transformations, and possibilities that continue to unfold. As this way of thinking continues to unfold, the focus moves even deeper into how systems form, how they hold together, and how they sometimes break apart. Instead of seeing the world as stable structures with clear boundaries, it becomes possible to see everything as something that is constantly being organized and reorganized. At any moment, life appears to have some form of order. There are patterns in how people behave, how societies function, and how ideas are understood. But this order is not permanent. It is something that is built, maintained for a time, and then eventually changed or disrupted. To understand this, it helps to think about how habits form. A habit is not something fixed from the beginning. It develops through repetition. Over time, repeated actions create a sense of stability. What was once uncertain becomes familiar. This is how patterns in life are formed. The same process happens on a larger scale within society. Systems of behavior, traditions, and institutions are built through repeated actions and shared expectations. These systems create a sense of structure that makes life predictable. People begin to feel that this structure is natural, even though it has been created over time. This process of creating structure can be understood as a kind of organization. Different elements come together and form a stable arrangement. This arrangement gives shape to how people think, act, and interact. It creates a sense of identity and belonging. But this organization is never complete or permanent. Beneath every stable structure, there is always movement. New forces, new ideas, and new connections continue to emerge. These forces can slowly change the structure or sometimes disrupt it completely. This is where transformation becomes possible. When a structure becomes too rigid, it can begin to limit growth and creativity. It may continue to exist, but it no longer allows for new possibilities to develop. At this point, change becomes necessary. Change does not always happen in a dramatic way. Sometimes it begins quietly, through small differences and variations. A new idea appears, a different way of thinking begins to spread, or individuals start to act outside of established patterns. These small changes can gradually reshape the system. At other times, change can be more sudden. When pressures build within a system, they can reach a point where the existing structure can no longer hold. This leads to a break, where old patterns collapse and new ones begin to form. This movement between stability and change is constant. Life is never completely fixed, and it is never completely chaotic. It moves between these two states, creating patterns and then transforming them. Another important idea emerges here, which is how meaning itself is formed. Meaning is not something that exists independently of the world. It is created through connections. Words, ideas, and actions gain meaning through how they relate to other elements within a system. For example, language does not work because words have fixed meanings on their own. Words gain meaning through their relationships with other words and through how they are used in different situations. This means that meaning is always shifting, depending on context and connection. This understanding challenges the idea that there are fixed meanings or final interpretations. Instead, meaning becomes something dynamic. It changes as connections change. It evolves as new relationships are formed. This way of thinking also applies to knowledge. Knowledge is not simply a collection of facts that remain unchanged. It is shaped by how ideas are connected, interpreted, and used. Different systems of thought can produce different understandings of the same reality. Because of this, there is no single perspective that captures everything completely. Each way of thinking highlights certain aspects while leaving others in the background. This does not mean that all perspectives are equal, but it does mean that understanding is always partial and open to change. This openness creates space for creativity and exploration. Instead of trying to reach a final answer, thinking becomes a continuous process. Ideas can be developed, combined, and transformed in new ways. Another key aspect of this philosophy is the idea of movement across boundaries. Traditional thinking often creates clear divisions between categories. For example, it separates mind and body, individual and society, or order and chaos. Deleuze challenges these divisions by showing how everything is connected through processes that cross boundaries. The mind is not completely separate from a body. Individual identity is shaped by social interactions. Order and chaos are not opposites, but part of the same movement. By breaking down these rigid divisions, it becomes possible to see the world in a more fluid way. Instead of fixed categories, there are processes that connect and transform different elements. This perspective also changes how power is understood. Power is not only located in visible structures like governments or institutions. It operates through networks of relationships, through the shaping of behavior, and through the organization of systems. Power can create stability, but can also limit possibilities. It can shape how people think and act, often without them being fully aware of it. At the same time, because power operates through connections, it can also be challenged and transformed through new connections. This means that change does not always require direct confrontation. It can also happen through shifts in how people think, how they connect, and how they create new patterns of behavior. Another important theme is the idea of experimentation. Instead of following fixed paths, individuals can explore different ways of living. They can test new ideas, form new connections, and create new patterns. This does not mean acting without direction. It means being open to change and willing to move beyond established limits. Experimentation allows life to remain dynamic rather than becoming fixed and repetitive. Through experimentation, new possibilities emerge. Some of these possibilities may not work, but others can lead to new forms of understanding and new ways of living. This process keeps life active and creative. At the same time, this approach requires a willingness to let go of certainty. Fixed answers provide comfort, but they can also limit growth. By accepting uncertainty, individuals open themselves to a wider range of experiences and possibilities. This does not mean that everything becomes uncertain or unstable. It means that stability is understood as something temporary, something that can change when new conditions arise. Through all of these ideas, a deeper understanding of life begins to form. Life is not a fixed structure, but a continuous process of organization and transformation. Meaning is not given once and for all, but created through connections. Systems provide stability, but they also change over time. In this way, existence becomes something fluid and open. It is shaped by movement, by relationships, and by the constant interplay between structure and change. And within this movement, there's always the possibility of creating something new, something that did not exist before, something that emerges from the endless process of becoming. As all of these ideas come together, a final picture begins to form that changes how life itself is understood. It moves away from the idea that the world is something fixed that must be explained once and for all, and instead presents reality as something that is always in motion, always forming, and always open to new possibilities. At the center of this understanding is a simple but powerful shift. Instead of asking what something is, the focus becomes how it works, how it connects, and how it changes. This shift may seem small, but it transforms everything. It removes the need to define life in rigid terms and replaces it with a way of thinking that follows movement and transformation. This means that existence is not something stable that we simply discover. It is something that is constantly being created through interactions, relationships, and processes. Everything that exists is part of this ongoing creation. Nothing stands completely still, and nothing exists entirely on its own. Within this flow, human life becomes something active rather than passive. A person is not just shaped by the world around them. They also participate in shaping it. Through their actions, their thoughts, and their connections, they contribute to the patterns that form reality. This creates a different sense of responsibility. It is no longer about following fixed rules or reaching a final understanding. It is about being aware of how one's actions and connections influence the world. Even small changes can create new paths, new relationships, and new possibilities. At the same time, this philosophy encourages a deeper acceptance of complexity. Life is not simple or easily reduced to clear categories. It contains contradictions, variations, and constant movement. Trying to force everything into simple definitions often leads to misunderstanding. By accepting complexity, a person becomes more open to experience. They can see multiple sides of a situation, recognize different possibilities, and respond in a more flexible way. This openness allows for a richer and more dynamic way of living. Another important idea that becomes clear is that there is no final point where everything is complete. There is no single moment where life reaches a perfect state and stops changing. Instead, there is continuous development. Each moment leads to another. Each change creates further change. This can feel uncertain, but it also means that possibilities never disappear. No situation is completely fixed. There is always the potential for something new to emerge, even in conditions that seem stable or limited. This perspective also changes how problems are approached. Instead of trying to eliminate difference or reduce everything to a single answer, it becomes possible to work with complexity. Problems can be explored from different angles, and solutions can emerge through new connections rather than through rigid rules. In this way, thinking itself becomes creative. It is not just about finding answers, but about forming new ways of understanding. Ideas can be combined, transformed, and developed in ways that open new paths rather than closing them. Another key aspect of this philosophy is the importance of movement in life. When life becomes too fixed, too controlled, or too repetitive, it loses its creative energy. Growth slows down, and possibilities become limited. Movement, change, and variation are what keep life active. This does not mean constant chaos. It means allowing space for change within structure. A balance is needed where stability provides support, but does not prevent transformation. Too much rigidity blocks growth, while too much instability makes it difficult to build anything lasting. Within this balance, individuals can begin to live more freely. Not free in the sense of having no limits at all, but free in the sense of being able to move, adapt, and create within the conditions they are part of. Freedom becomes the ability to form new connections and explore new directions. This also leads to a different understanding of identity. A person is not something fixed that must remain the same. They are always in the process of becoming. Their identity changes as they form new relationships, encounter new ideas, and experience different situations. This does not mean losing oneself, but expanding what the self can be. Instead of being limited to a single definition, a person can develop in multiple ways. They can grow, change, and continue to evolve throughout life. At the same time, this philosophy invites a different relationship with the world. Instead of trying to control everything or fit everything into clear categories, it encourages engagement. Life is experienced more directly, with attention to how things connect and change. This engagement creates a sense of involvement. A person is not separate from the world, observing it from a distance. They are part of it, influencing it and being influenced by it at the same time. This creates a deeper connection to life as a whole. Another important idea is that creativity is not limited to art or special activities. It is part of everyday life. Every decision, every connection, and every way of thinking contributes to the creation of reality. Life itself becomes a creative process. Through this lens, even ordinary moments gain significance. They are not just repetitions of the same pattern, but opportunities for variation and change. Small differences can lead to new paths, and new paths can lead to entirely different outcomes. In the end, this philosophy does not offer a fixed system or a final answer. Instead, it offers a way of thinking that remains open, flexible, and dynamic. It encourages awareness of movement, connection, and change, and it invites individuals to participate actively in the process of becoming. Life is no longer something that needs to be defined once and for all. It is something that unfolds continuously, shaped by countless interactions and possibilities. There is no single path that must be followed, and no final state that must be reached. What remains is the ongoing process itself, a world that is constantly forming, constantly changing, and always open to new directions. And within that world, each individual becomes part of that movement, not as something fixed and unchanging, but as something alive, evolving, and endlessly becoming.